Hi, I'm Carol Fitzgerald from Reading Group Guides, a website from the Book Report Network, and the host of the Book Reporter Talks To video podcast series. We are so excited to have you here tonight for our Bookaccino Live book group event with Lisa Wingate. Now, you probably remember Lisa for that #1 New York Times bestseller that she had, Before We Were Yours, the one that sold over 3.5 million copies. Yes, you heard me right on that, folks, 3.5 million copies. Well, tonight we're going to be talking to her about Shelterwood, which came out in paperback last week. And it is a book that when I read last year really stayed with me. I have thought about this book so many times and thought about it against the landscape of things happening even in the country today. So, our book reporter reviewer, Amy Gładkowski, had this to say about Shelterwood when we reviewed it last year. It's about finding different paths, building new lives, and the heartbreak that is also part of the journey. Additionally, it shines a light on the women who were fighting for needed change in a world built and controlled by men. Now, as the evening goes on, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start and have a conversation with Lisa, and then we are going to bring up a member of our audience is going to ask some questions that she submitted in advance. And we are also going to have me ask a question on behalf of somebody else. And from there, we want you to be dropping over in the Q&A, not in the chat, the questions that you have for Lisa tonight, so we can make sure that we cover those as the evening goes on. Our voice of God, Tom Donadio, our editorial director, will be going through those to make sure no duplicates are being answered compared to what I've already spoken about with Lisa. But we're really looking forward to making sure that you are all part of this conversation as well. When I had the pleasure of reading this book, I selected as a Book Reporter Bets On selection. And as I said then, I knew very little about Eastern Oklahoma and I'd never traveled there. But after reading the book, I really wanted to go because I felt like it was a part of the country I wanted to see because Lisa had brought it so much to life for me. So, what we're going to do is we are going to be talking spoilers. So, I want you to be very clear on this, folks. We're assuming everyone has read the book. So, we say this up front. So, don't say later on, oh, I didn't want to hear about that. This is for people who have read. That's the reason we waited till a year after the hardcover came out so we could have this conversation. And with that housekeeping behind us, I think we're ready to get started. Let me welcome Lisa to the stage. Hi, Lisa.
Hey.
It is so good to see you again. It's so good. Last time
Oh,
we were
it
in a little
is so
town in
good to
Colorado.
be here. Yes, absolutely. I wish we were still sitting in the coffee shop in Colorado and everybody could come join us, but this is the next best thing.
Next best thing, I'm in New Jersey and you're in Oklahoma. It's like,
Yes,
here we go. Here we go.
yes. We just were up here yesterday for a book event in the area where the book is set.
It's like fabulous. Now, when you go out and you go to an area like this, do you feel you get different questions from people because they know the area so well, or is it, the same kinds of conversations?
Some of the same questions and some different ones, and definitely some different stories. Up here you talk to people, and there are stories about the family land, and there are stories about how the land passed out of the family or if they still have the land. And so, the stories up here are a little different for sure.
Right, right. So let's start from the beginning. What made you decide to write this book? What was your inspiration?
So every book for me starts with a spark, and I never know what the spark is going to be.
Hmm.
It can be anything. It can be a story someone tells me, a story a reader writes to me about. It can be clickbait on the internet. Frog saves a woman's life. Like, I'm gonna click and see how did the frog save the woman's life? What kind of frog was it? I've got to know. It can be anything. It's often a little nugget of story history that is so strange that if you wrote it as fiction, you wouldn't believe it.
Hmm.
But it happened. So you have to believe it. So the nuggets that inspired the sparks that sparked this story, the little story nuggets, one was the story of little Sarah Rector, this little 11-year-old girl who's growing up around 1900 in a little ramshackle cabin in the hills of Oklahoma with her family and getting marriage proposals from all over the world. This little 11-year-old girl. And the second was about this much newsprint. So, 4 or 5 lines in a 1909 newspaper about a woman who heard reports of elf children living in a hollow tree in the hills of Oklahoma and she went to investigate who these children were, what they were, and why they were living in a hollow tree in the forest. And the one thing those two stories had in common, the discovery of oil that had passed into these children's hands when the lands of the 5 tribes of eastern Oklahoma, so that's the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole, are divided up, and every man, woman, and child who's on the rolls gets a parcel of land. So children become unwitting landowners.
Mm-hmm. And here you are, on this property, and you're going to play on it, or what are you going to do? Oh, and you've got the oil. It's like,
Right.
no. You've got something a lot more valuable than where you're just going to play. So you've got 2 time periods. You got 1909, 1990. What set you up for those 2 time periods? Why those are 2 going to work together?
So I love dual time frames. I just love, so my husband was a physics teacher for years, and he would come home with these crazy physics theories that just like tie my brain in little knots, because I do not have that kind of a mind.
Mm-hmm.
But one of them is that time is not linear, that time is like a layer cake. So it's tied to place, and everything that happened in a place is still happening. You just can't see it because you're only on one layer of the cake for that place. So I'm fascinated with this idea of like right where you're sitting, what happened there? What's all the things that happened in that spot?
Mm-hmm.
And right where I'm sitting here in Oklahoma, what happened here on this piece of ground? What are all the things, if it really is a layer cake, what are all the layers? What's happening here? And so that's why I love dual time frames, because I love the idea of someone discovering what they didn't know about the place they live, the family they live in, because the secret things that we don't know, we're living those. We're affected by those. We're affected by all those other layers of the cake, whether we know what they are or not. So hence the 2 time frames. 1990 in this case, okay, for me, that's a modern day time frame.
Yes.
I know there are people who may think that's a time in history at this point. However, for me, that's modern. And so that is when they were first designating the Winding Stair Mountains of Oklahoma as a national wilderness area.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, it had been Forest Service land, but it had been, there had been a lot of abuses and graft involved with the clear cutting of the timber there. So it was made a national wilderness area to protect it from any further devastation. And that happened right around that 1990 timeframe.
So that gave you the 2 to be balancing up against and what you do. So let's talk about the Dawes Act. Was the Dawes Act was giving everybody the oil rights? Was that the oil rights, or what's Dawes?
So the Dawes Act was when the lands were, prior to that, the tribal nations of Eastern Oklahoma, the 5 big tribal nations, they had these big reservation lands in common for each tribal nation. So around the turn of the century, the Dawes Act was passed, and it arranged to where every tribal member would be put on the rolls, and the land would be divided up into individual parcels of ownership. And unfortunately, and then categories of parcels started to become what was called alienable, meaning they could be bought and sold. And when that started, then it becomes coming into Oklahoma and becoming the legal guardian of a landowner, in particular children, in particular orphans, is the new gold rush. It's the lightning lane to riches. So people pour into Oklahoma by the hundreds and thousands, seeking to gain legal guardianships over children who are landowners, who have valuable lands and oil rights. And then the newspapers pretty soon are full of ads offering land owned by minors in the name of a guardian for sale or lease for the benefit of the minor. However, there's no oversight on this system, making sure that the proceeds of that do benefit the minor. So these guardians, many of whom have numerous guardianships over numerous children, they soon figure out it's easier to stick them in orphanages or just chase them off into the woods or do away with them altogether and just keep collecting the oil monies or, selling off the property or whatever, or selling off the timber or the grazing rights or whatever their agenda is. And this system goes on and it flourishes. Money flows, the county judges are in on it. The merchants are in on it. There's a whole specialty trade of lawyers who specialize in these guardianship cases. People keep record books of elderly grandparents who are raising grandchildren who are about to die, so the kids will soon become orphans, or people who are soon to inherit more land. And this becomes just this massive system of graft, and the money is going all the way to the state politicians and all the way to Washington. So nobody is motivated to try to stop it until this one amazing woman finds the elf children, these 3 kids living in the hollow tree, and figures out that they are under the care of a court-appointed guardian. They're not elves, obviously. They are oil millionaires. And they are under the care of a court-appointed guardian who is living like a king on their oil monies, while these 3 little kids try to survive in the woods and become so ragged and scared and skittish that people think they are elves.
They think they're the little children, like out of the forest, out because they're really trying to just figure out where we're going to eat, what we're going to do. And they're trying to be in charge. And I like the way they set up a little hierarchy among themselves. Like, you're in charge. You go do this. You go do that. They've already put a little system in place for themselves.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you imagine what it would be like for kids to try to survive in the woods, you have to think back to, most of us at some time in our life crawled under the front porch or out on the back stoop and formed a club with our friends, and so you had a notebook, and so-and-so is going to be the president, and so-and-so, so, I mean, I think that's what it would be like for kids, That's what we always did when we formed all our secret societies as kids. We had some form of organization.
Some sort of who's going to be in charge and who's going to home and tell the parents that we're coming later. Like, we're not coming now. We're
Right.
to do. Who's going to be the one that can do that? We were in 4th grade in New Jersey. You study New Jersey. And I know other places around the country, it's 4th grade is when you learn. Did you study that? Like, did you study Oklahoma when you were in 4th grade? Like, did you learn about this when you were in school?
So we studied, certainly the 5 tribes and, the history of the Trail of Tears. And these were all tribes that were removed from farther east. So Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas, they were removed and brought to Indian territory and given these reservation lands that was supposed to be, they were never supposed to be bothered there. And all of that maybe would have been fine until oil was found underneath it. But there were a lot of valuable resources there. So, I mean, I think either way, the people who wanted to get their hands on it would have eventually come after it. But we studied all that. But in all my years from grade school through college and museum visits and field trips and history books galore, I never heard of this. I never heard of Kate Barnard, the woman who went up against this system of graft and tried to defend these children. I never heard her name. I never saw her in a history book. I never saw her portrait on a wall anywhere in the state capitol. Nobody ever mentioned her to me. And when I found out about her, sifting through clickbait on the internet, basically, and when I found those 2 sparks, I couldn't believe it because I thought, how did I not know that the person elected as statehood in this state where I grew up from 2nd grade on? We moved around a lot and then we landed in Oklahoma for my dad's job. And how did I not know that the politician elected by far the widest margin at statehood and by far the most popular politician in the state was a woman in a time when women couldn't vote? I mean, I just could not believe I never knew this.
And yeah, it's like, okay, how was this part of history just glossed over? How are we not talking about this? We also then have the modern day, 1990. For you and I, the modern day. That's not
Right.
history, okay? Modern day. So let's talk about her and what she's adding to the story, because you've got to be somebody that's uncovering things. You've got to be somebody that's sort of be able to guide what you as an author are trying to do. Is that what her role was as well? And also she's got this young child who makes it really fun because she's grappling with, seeing the world through his eyes at the same time.
Right. Yeah. So since these are federal lands, it seemed like a park ranger was a logical choice.
Hmm.
Horse Thief Trail National Park in the story is fictional, but it's based on Winding Stair National Wilderness Area. Um, for one thing, there are no national parks in the center of the US, and I just thought the center of the US deserved one. So the good thing
Hmm.
about fiction is you can make that happen. Um, but Valerie is a park law enforcement ranger, and I learned so much researching her character about what park law enforcement do. I learned so much interviewing park rangers, spending time learning what their jobs are. These are the hardest working people.
Hmm.
And over the last several decades, the parks have become kind of more and more short staffed.
Hmm.
So, they're doing more jobs. I mean, they get stuck with everything from cleaning off graffiti to pulling stuff out of trash out of pit toilets that people
Hmm.
dump in there. I mean, they're amazingly dedicated to the land. Law enforcement rangers in the Park Service are more likely to die in the line of duty than any other branch of law enforcement.
Hmm.
I mean, it
Really?
is a very dangerous job. I had no idea. It's not just a walk in the park. I
Mm-mm.
mean, it is
Literally.
a literally, it is a very complex, dangerous job. All the while they're doing it, they have to be nice to the public, even when people are, really obnoxious or don't want to follow the rules or don't think they should have to follow the rules. These are amazing public servants. And so as I got into that, I really relished being able to show the job she does and why it's important and how hard she fights as a woman in 1990
Hmm.
doing park law enforcement to be taken seriously in a man's world. I had a college friend who went into the Park Service, had been in studying law enforcement in college, and then ended up going into the Park Service. And I don't remember a ton about it, but back then we used to write letters and we exchanged some letters. And I remember a lot of, it was hard for her because it was a very much a man's world at that time. And it was hard for her to be taken seriously. She was tall and blonde and cute. And, it was
Yeah.
very hard for her to be taken seriously. And some of the things that went on, was shocked by at that time in the Park Service. But today's Park Services, these are amazing professionals. And I just can't say enough about how helpful they were, how what great people they are, how thankful we should be for them that they're taking care of these, beautiful lands that belong to all of us.
Hmm. Hmm. I love that you put one in the middle of the country. Now, okay, this is me not being super smart. Obviously, I didn't realize there wasn't one in the middle of the country. And my son would be, Mom, come on, you should know these things because he goes to many national parks. But I never realized that. So you've been a trailblazer there, literally.
Yeah, I never did either. I mean, I love parks. We've spent time in them over the years, but I just would look at those people in the, kind of cool looking ranger uniforms and think that would be such a fun job, what they do all day. And I had no idea what is required of these people and, and how low the pay scales are. And I had the ranger who, Jody Lee, who's a state law enforcement ranger in Texas, or retired, but who did the final read through of the book for me, because there's so many complex details and I wanted to get it right. And you can't research it all. You eventually need a person who can sit down and read the book. And, I remember him commenting to me, I had put in there about Val having to really make choices about what she'll buy for her son, Charlie, when they make a trip to the store, because, the budget is tight as a single parent working in park law enforcement. And Jody had written in the notes in the margin, yeah, this is so right. He said at one time we almost qualified for WIC.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And that's working full time and that's having
Yeah.
a good job. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I thought he was really fun because he's 7 and he's so inquisitive and he wants to know everything. And mom, why? And this, that, the other thing. It's just a cute age. My mother, I think she just should teach second grade. She goes, they were really cute. In third grade, they got fresh.
I think that's about right. Yeah. Charlie's at that really fun, inquisitive. I raised boys. So, boys are just such wonderful, organic little creatures.
Hmm.
Little girl from the time she's 2, she like walks into a room and she's kind of reading the room and She knows what she wants to wear and all that. A boy is like a puppy. I mean, you wash him once in a while and you send him out in the yard. I mean, they're
And if he
just,
comes back, he comes back with three friends. And then the
yeah,
mothers go, do you have them or do I have them? Like, who's going to have them at this point, you know?
right.
And they move as a unit. The kids and their friends at that age, they move like wherever everybody is. We used to
They
go to the
do.
Outer Banks and they'd stay up till 4 a.m. and they'd sleep till 4. It was very funny, but they'd all come in ready for breakfast at 4 in the afternoon. So Debbie Moore, who's one of our longtime Bookaccino Live attendees, is going to join us not on screen tonight. She's just going to join us by phone from Myrtle Beach. She lives both up in Syracuse and Myrtle Beach, and she has been with us at every one of our Bookaccino Live events, participating with the authors. So welcome, Debbie, to be with us tonight.
Thanks, Carol. Lisa, it's so nice to meet you.
Hi,
I
Debbie.
I, I love your books. And one thing I noticed that both in Shelterwood and Before We Were Yours, you write about the plight and the hardships of children who are unwanted or abandoned, either intentionally or because of family circumstances, and they're forced to fend for themselves. And then they find themselves at the mercy of the government. What draws you to their stories?
So I was raised kind of in a suburban environment that was very homogenous. Everybody's dad had about the same kind of job. Everybody lived in a little 3-bedroom ranch type house. It was all very similar. But when my boys were little, we moved to a small town. And small towns are not homogenous. It's a microcosm of society, all in a little small place, all in the same school. So my son started coming home, quickly figured out that the way to get to the cool kids table was to have a packed lunch, not to eat the cafeteria tray. So we started packing lunches. Then he started coming home and saying, can I have an extra oatmeal cream pie? Can I have an extra pudding cup? And so every day I'm like, nobody, it's one dessert per kid. You cannot have an extra. And so eventually, after several weeks of this, he asked me again, and I did the thing that moms do sometimes. Why do you keep asking that? No. And he looked at me with his big blue eyes and he said, well, Jake's only ever got a peanut butter sandwich in his lunch. And I don't know why his mama doesn't pack more than a peanut butter sandwich. We can split my Doritos. And if you send me an oatmeal cream pie, we can tear it in half. But when you send a pudding cup, we've only got one spoon and one of us has got to use our fingers. And he had no understanding, but I knew right away because I knew where Jake's mom worked. Single mom, worked in the dollar store in town, and she's doing the best she can to get Jake to the cool kids table, but the chips and the dessert are too much. She's using what she can get on WIC. And so that was kind of the start of a lot of bonus kids, a lot of sending extra lunch pieces to school, a lot of work with the churches, just to try to make sure kids need a safety net. There are a lot of kids out there who need a safety net. And that is part of where the title of the book came from. It's a real word. I didn't make it up. It's the forestry term I discovered it working on the research for the story. It's the forestry term for the tall, old growth trees that shelter and protect all the little trees and the little animals and the mosses and all the things that grow underneath need the shelter of those tall trees, or they can't grow, or the wind and the weather is too much or it's too hot and whatever, and they die down there. And that's kids. Kids need the shelter of they don't always have the parents around them, or the parents aren't always adequate or that tuned in. And kids need the shelter of community, teachers, neighbors, people, church volunteers, librarians, people in the town. And so it was such a metaphor for what happens to these kids when they don't have the shelter at home and they need the shelterwood of people around them to take them under wing. And, we learned that firsthand, just living in a small town and having a lot of kids around us.
Yeah.
That's great. That's interesting of how Shelterwood came to be. I loved your character, Valerie. And then I read what some of the things you'd written about as background about Kate Barnard and the things that she faced and trying to get things done for kids and trying to find all the effort she made. And then all of the pushback she got. And it seemed like Valerie got, in a different context, but the same kind of pushback. And I was just wondering whether part of Valerie's story was your way of paying tribute and recognizing the work of Kate Barnard, as well as making sure that the stories of these children were not forgotten.
Yeah, I think so. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but yeah, I think Valerie is, she's 80 years later or something than Kate Barnard, but still facing a lot of the same things, not being taken seriously. People want to discount what she's investigating. There are powers that be that are making money, and kind of the good old boy network doesn't want to be interrupted. Even if it comes at the expense of kids or families or vulnerable people in the community. And, Valerie is kind of this outsider who, she does sometimes think, gosh, I need my job. I have a kid to raise. Like, I can't take the risk of pushing this issue, of getting involved in this. But then she can't not, because she's a mom and she's a person who kind of can't bear to not do can't bear to look the other way and not do what is decent and right. And Kate Barnard was a personality. I mean, she's this little, not even 5 foot tall Irish woman. She's barely 30 years old, may have lied about how old she was to even be able to run for office. But she admittedly loves what she calls a good shindy, meaning a fight. And she finds it when she finds those kids in the hollow tree, and she finds out their guardian has 51 other kids in guardianship, many of whom he has lost track of. He didn't know where they are. She finds the fight of her life.
Yeah, she was amazing. It was so interesting to read about her. Has there been any reaction, either positive or negative, to Shelterwood from political leaders, the Native population, or the general public of Oklahoma?
I haven't had a lot of negative reaction. There's been a little bit kind of backhandedly. There have been a few people who have posted some things on loops and things who, are very politically one way or the other or whatever. And I had not from the Choctaw community. I mean, the Choctaw Nation was so helpful with everything, including the language pieces, because there's some Choctaw language in there, and it's, only in recent years are there starting to be real standards of how to write the words of the Choctaw language. So that was interesting, because I would reference books that were 20 or 30 years old. Then I would go to Dora, my contact at the Choctaw Department of Language in the Choctaw Nation, and she'd be like, no. This, that means the fish went under the sea or whatever, And so she would correct it. And she was so helpful, even to the point of helping the audiobook narrators learn to say the words, which I was so glad that was their problem and not mine. But the Choctaw Nation was great. I mean, there was always, every time I asked, somebody guided me to who I needed to talk to.
I mean, it was interesting when you said, you're talking about being in school and that how did you never hear of Kate Barnard? Have people come up to you from Oklahoma and said, I never heard of that before. I never heard of the elf children. I never heard of these, this types of stories.
Oh, yes. I have met probably 96% people who had never heard of her, and about 4% who have. Now, last night we did an event in McAllister, which with the tourism people who are getting the True Grit trail started, following the trail of the story of True Grit, the Portis book and the movie, which goes into the Winding Stair Mountains from Fort Smith to McAllister. So there will be eventually a hiking trail that you can take. So we're right in the location of where these things happen at that point. And one woman brought me the picture of, she said, oh, my granddaughter, they had to do, I guess it was like a history fair, like a science fair, but for history. And she said, yeah, my granddaughter did Kate Barnard several years ago. And she showed me the cutest picture of this little girl all dressed up as Kate Barnard, with her, board behind her, her poster board thing with pictures of Kate Barnard and all about her and stuff. So some people do know about her, but she's very, very hidden from history. There was a little bubbling up in about 2000 where they put a statue of her in the state capitol, and there was a Kate Barnard Award. And I don't even think they give that out anymore. So there was a little bit of interest in her for a little while.
When you write a dual timeline book, and I know you said you like them so much, do you write each timeline separately and then put them together, or do you go back and forth between timelines?
So I write it, I'm very linear. So I write it just as you read it. I switch, it takes me about 2 days to write a chapter. So I'll be in one for 2 days and then in the other time frame and the other person's point of view. It just I don't know. I'm that kind of I'm not a total seat of the pants writer. I do have kind of a skeleton of the story in mind, but I'm doing a lot of hanging the flesh on the bones as I go. And that's going to change as I do little bits of research, as I find nuggets of the story in the research, as I get to know the characters. The park cases that are confronted by Val in the story, the more I would research and find out real cases of things that park rangers dealt with and rescues they dealt with and criminals they dealt with and things, that informed a lot of what happens in Val's storyline. And so it's always a developing thing, and the two time frames are almost developing out of each other. So I don't write them separately. I know a lot of people do, but I just start at the beginning and start finding my way to the end.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I mean, as I said, I love your books. I can't wait to find out what you're working on and have another great book. And thank you so much for writing both of these books.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that so much. It would be no fun if nobody read them. So I just appreciate everybody who sort of joins me on these adventures.
Thanks so
thank you
much.
again for joining us, like always. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, Carol.
I'm going to jump in with a question from Ella Layer from Moline, Illinois. And she says, Indigenous peoples were displaced or lost control of their ancestral lands, as seen in Oklahoma with the Dawes Act. Thus, the exploitation of children was sanctioned by the government through counterfeit guardianships, and Kate Barnard's call for, "What are you going to do about it when I leave?" was ignored, even though she got large crowds at her town hall meetings. Our current administration's approach to opening federal lands for oil and gas leasing raises concern that this would repeat historical patterns of indigenous exploitation because many of these lands are part of their cultural identity and ancestral history. Do you see any parallels in your story and this violation of established federal lands, and will restitution ever happen?
Well, what I can say is that the reason that Winding Stair was designated and fought, and the congressman and things at the time fought hard to get it designated, was because of the abuses that were happening there. Because of the fact that on what's called the Talamina Drive, which is a scenic drive over the top of the Winding Stair, which was a big tourist attraction, which a lot of the local businesses and towns depended on. Leaf season on the Talamina Drive and dogwood season in the spring brings in a lot of traffic, a lot of business. The graft between the timber companies had caused huge patches to be clear cut from the land. So they're just, and I remember seeing that as a young married. In college, I picked up a guy from Antlers and married him. And so, my young married life was going down to Antlers. And on the drive, I would see these just look like the surface of the moon, with piles of dirt and tree branches piled up and everything cut. And I would think, who would let that happen to their land? Because that's never going to, it's going to be years before that recovers. Who would let that happen? These beautiful mountains. And what I realized researching why Winding Stair was designated and why people fought so hard for it was that land belongs to you and me. That's public land. Public land needs to be properly regulated. Public land, when regulated and treated properly, generates a lot of income. Our national parks are actually income generators. The budget total for the national parks, if you took a pie and you cut it into, sorry, I'm soapboxing. If you took a pie and you cut it into 100 pieces, so you've got one hundredth of your pie, and you took that 1/100th and you cut it into 13 tiny slivers, you'd have less than a bite. That's the total amount of federal budget that supports all our national parks, all the park rangers, all the everything. It is a tiny smidge, and it is way smaller than the amount of revenue our parks generate in tourism, in visits to businesses around the parks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the parks are already understaffed. So I do worry that with the parks even less watched, that we open ourselves to circumstances where, yes, things are destroyed, things are not properly managed. The Park Service manages things like timber contracts. They manage things like fire prevention. You think it doesn't affect you if you don't live near a park. Well, you can live a long ways away, and when that park catches on fire because we fired forest rangers, you're going to be breathing the smoke. So it's a serious issue, and I'm horrified to think that that the parks would be messed with at all. These people are already stretched so thin to do the jobs they do.
And I think that also during the pandemic, when people were traveling, where were they going? They were going to the national parks. It was a place that you could go, and you weren't leaving the country. Let's face it, you were not going, all over the world. And I think that people were discovering it more. And there's been so much more. I mean, you see puzzles about the parks, you see celebrations about the parks and things like this. But I still think that we take it all for granted. We take it a lot more for granted than we want to. And there's this beautiful and treacherous setting in the Winding Stair Mountains. And one quote is that this place is as special as Plymouth Rock, the Rockies, the Mississippi, and the Pacific Ocean. So have you hiked there? Have you? Because I know you hike. We wouldn't hike together. I'd be on the baby trail.
I have hiked the Winding Stair, and it's sort of a gorgeous, fairly untouched gem. It gets its traffic in the summer for sure, but not compared to Yosemite or something like that. You can go in places in the Winding Stair, and you don't hear any people sounds. You don't hear any cars. Your cell phone doesn't work. It is just pure quiet. All you can hear is the wind in the trees and the birds and the natural sounds. And it's a magical place to be. And it's so undisturbed from by the amount of human presence that's there, and the streams are clear and you can see the fish, and it's just a gorgeous place to be, and I love it and I treasure it, and I want to see it properly managed. The history of those mountains, here's what happens when we just leave lands to commercial exploits. The history of those mountains is that from the early 1900s to the 30s, the timbering companies had come in. Those mountains were laid bare. All the old growth was cut. The mountains were laid bare. The only real old growth in the Winding Stair is where it was too rugged to timber it, the really, really rugged parts. The land was so ruined that when it was put up for auction, the only buyer was the United States government for a little over $1 an acre. And so it has all been at your expense and mine, at our taxpayer expense, reforested, reclaimed. It's beautiful. Yes, logging can be done responsibly, and things need to be done to keep the forests more fireproof and all that. But it needs to be done under the supervision of foresters who know what they're doing, and not just people who are trying to turn a profit.
Yeah, it was interesting because we spent a lot of time out in Colorado, and when you're out there and you realize that's National Forest Service land that those ski resorts are on, and I used to say, well, why do they close this time of year? They go, well, they have to, because they're leasing the land from the Forest Service, and the Forest Service now says this animal is, going to be on this land, nature, nesting at this time, and you have to be out because this. And it was fascinating to me. And we had a highway going in New Jersey, this Route 78, and for a long time it was the tree toad and they were trying to relocate this animal. And I was like, I can't even fathom that we get off, we go on all these back roads and then back on the interstate because they were trying to figure out, and the roads that go ahead, above for the deer to walk across. I was like,
Right.
yeah, it's pretty amazing though. And there are few of them on the highway because they have their other ways of getting around. It's really crazy. So, Tom, our editorial director, do you have some questions for us, Mr. Voice of God?
Yes, we do have some good questions here. First, we'll start with Mary, who says, Lisa, I loved your novel right up until Skidi, as a Canadian, I had to look up that pronunciation, was going to end up in the evil clutches of Tesco. If you could speculate, what would the wonderful characters of Val, Charlie, and Curtis be up to in 2025?
Yeah, I hated it about the pony too. I just couldn't figure out how to get him loose. I hope he breaks out of his corral and runs away back to the wine next year once Tesco gets home with him. Um, but what would Val and Curtis, a lot of people have asked me, am I going to write another book about Val and Curtis? Are they going to get together, etc.? I mean, I think so. I think there's a thing there between Val and Curtis and Charlie, little Charlie. I think with Val's history, it's going to take time to develop. Well, with her history and also her dedication to her career, that's going to take some time to develop. But I think there's a thing there that's more than a friendship. So I think they're two people who are wounded from their pasts, from their past relationships and things that have happened and tragedies in their past. But I think they are a pretty good fit for each other. So I think within a few years, Val and Curtis and little Charlie will be a family, and maybe there'll be a few more little Vals or little Curtises added to the family. That's the way I picture it.
It's good.
Always fun to speculate like that.
Yes.
Mary also added, by the way, she said, I like the title even more when the meaning was explained at the end.
Yeah. It's such a pretty word. I mean, I feel like, we should just bring it back into the regular vernacular. I mean, when I read it, I was like, that is the most beautiful word. And you can read it and feel what it means. Some words you can kind of feel the meaning of the word when you read the word. It's that kind of word.
Question from Carol. With this book, have you been asked any question that stopped you in your tracks?
Oh, wow. Have I been asked any question that stopped me in my tracks? I don't think so. If I have, I've conveniently forgotten it.
Right.
I cannot think of one that absolutely stopped me. We've had a lot of very interesting questions over time about this story, about the history, about the kids, about the child labor piece of it, which, some discussions that comes up, some it doesn't. I've heard some horrifying stories about people's family history with child labor, children who were working in really horrible circumstances. I mean, that's another piece of it that's part of the story, because at that same time, business owners have ads out wanting young boys and girls for work. And when you go to the Library of Congress and Google child labor photos, you will find the photos taken by people working for the anti-child labor movement of little skinny barefoot kids working in these dark, dingy, dangerous environments where hands and fingers got cut off, and kids working in glass factories where they would breathe the dust for a few years and their lungs would be ruined. I mean, it's horrible to think of the things we let go on. And that's in my history too. On the census are two little Irish boys, 9 and 11, who are my ancestors. And at that time, they are the sole breadwinners for their widowed mother and their 3-year-old sister. Their father has already died in the few years since they came to America together. And within another year or two, their mother will also be dead. And we don't know from there how these three grew up. We don't even know if they all survived. One of them survived and was my ancestor, but I just try to imagine these kids would have been working 6 to 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, days or nights, shifts or nights. I mean, it's just unfathomable to think of kids, think of their little, what a kid looks like at that age, their little skinny bodies, and the what kids were doing and made to do in those days, and sometimes out of family necessity, sometimes just because they had really lousy parents who didn't want to have to work themselves.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's so unimaginable to think that. It's wow, horrifying. Um, Tony asks, how long did it take you to write Shelterwood from research to finished story?
Oh gosh. It took me about 2.5 years from research to finish, which is really slow for me. But it was one of those stories where so much of the history is really buried that, it just took a long time to dig it up and a lot of physical digging to find enough of the facts of the story. And on both pieces, really, to really learn the inside history of Val's job as a park ranger and what that would be like, and what it was like when they designated that land and why they did it and all the things. And then also to learn to find the Kate Barnard history took some time. It took some digging. It was worth it. It was fascinating. And and while there are some tragic things in that time period for sure. I mean, it's ultimately a story of just heroic people, who do a heroic job and are willing to risk everything for what's right. And so, and the ending is happy.
Lisa, when you're writing, I'm just going to jump in with the question. If you get to a section and you don't know what to like, do you stop or just put line, fill in, do what I can, I'll go back and add later?
I pretty much write straight through. So I will go ahead and write the scene. And and I may be writing it that day thinking I'm going to have, this is just awful. This is just junk. And sometimes I go back and it really is junk and I have to work with it and work on it. And sometimes I go back and I'm like, well, actually, I must have just been in a mood because there's really nothing wrong with that. And so, I pretty much plug along and I work by word count every day. So that way I can tell how long until the book is finished. And I pretty much try to stick to it. I mean, unless something major happens, I will do my words for the day and plug my way through the scenes. Otherwise, I'd be leaving all the parts. Everybody has parts they like to write and parts that are not so much their thing. Some people love dialogue and action. Some people love narrative. Writers are all different. But if I let myself start skipping over stuff, I'd be leaving all the parts I don't like to do. and then I'd have to go back and do them. So I just plug along.
Yeah. Just keep the fingers going.
Yes, absolutely.
A question from GJ. Do you have a favorite character in the book or one you would want to spend time with outside of the story?
Do I have a character I'd like to spend time with outside the story? Well, of course, it would be fascinating to sit down to lunch with Kate Barnard, I'm sure. But I would go follow Ranger Valerie around for a day anytime. I just I was fascinated by her job. And if she were real, I would definitely be her friend. I'd sit down for coffee with her and hear about whatever went on in the Park Service that day, because it's such an intricate when I sat down with Ranger Jody Lee to go through after he'd read the manuscript and he invited me over for coffee, he said, we'll go through it. And I walked into Jody's house. Jody's retired now. And I walked into Jody's house and there he had my notebook with the manuscript in it. And it had sticky notes just sticking out everywhere. And I went, oh no, inwardly I thought, oh my gosh, she's found all these things wrong. I'm just way off base. And what it actually turned out when Jody was leafing through it, a lot of it was just Jody saying things like, yeah, right on. That's how it is. That's exactly. And then he pointed out some things that were different or that you wouldn't do it that way. But the stories he told me, oh my gosh, just I laughed. I was shocked. I couldn't believe some of the stupid things people do when they come to parks. It was fascinating. I mean, I could sit down and listen to park ranger stories all day long.
It's America showing up on vacation.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It's amazing how people will dance when they think nobody's watching, I guess.
Yeah. We're gonna make a campfire. We don't know what we're doing. Those sticks are not gonna work together.
Denise wants to know why the different covers of the book. She's talking about the differences between the hardcover and the paperback.
Oh yeah, sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. Before we were yours, kept its cover hardcover to paperback, and through almost all the foreign countries. There were a few foreign countries who recovered the book, but most of them just used the American cover and put the title in whatever language it is. This book, we just decided that the decision was just made to highlight Ranger Valerie in the paperback cover. And so it's got a completely different paperback cover, which I love. I liked the first one, and I loved seeing Ranger Valerie and the Winding Stair Mountains get their shot at the cover in the second one. And I don't really know all the reasons, but I love the colors in this one. I love kind of the bright oranges and the bright colors. So
do you have it there? Because I have the hardcover. I don't have the paperback. Do you have a paperback, or do you
not have it here within reach?
No, it doesn't. Okay. We'll make sure we put it. We're going to superimpose it on me holding it.
Yeah, there you go. We'll Photoshop it in.
It's my fault. I totally didn't for space that I needed.
I did not think to grab it as I sat down here.
I looked and I went, look at that, different.
I do always find it very interesting whenever we update on the site the hardcovers to the paperbacks to see how sometimes the paperback is radically different, or maybe sometimes like the color scheme is different, and like why that might be. It's just always very interesting to see those, those changes, whether they might be subtle or, more drastic.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes you're coming out in a different season with the two books too. And, something feels a little bit out of season.
Right.
For the time of year it's coming out. And I do kind of like that the paperback looks a little more like it could be a cooler season. You just got a jacket on and it looks a little more appropriate for something in February.
That makes sense.
That makes sense. I used to work at magazines, and it was always about the cover. The cover was what you were going to buy. Right. There was a time where they were trying to do it so that girls' eyes looked like they had double lit, because that would draw you. Like you were looking at her eyes and it would draw you. And the things that we used to go through over covers, but we used to try them on people. Like, what did you think about the cover? What did you think about this? And the publishing business doesn't try it out on readers. It tries it out on people in marketing, people in sales. Obviously people in sales know what's going on in the marketplace, but it's very interesting that it's usually not readers. Like, what do you think about these covers? Which would you pick? What would you do?
I love it when somebody does that, though. So every once in a while, somebody will post all the choices on Facebook or something. Yes. And, I love seeing what people have to say about the covers. Covers are everything to how well it does. But we never, and trends become popular, beach chairs or whatever it is, but we never, there's always a little bit of magic. You can feel it when a cover kind of tells you a 30-second story. But nobody knows how to make it happen up front. We're always guessing, like, is this going to tell the 30-second story, But when it happens, you can feel it when you see the cover.
It's like the woman from the back. The women from the back are on all the different covers. And it's, looking at the trends and seeing what's going on.
Right.
So this isn't a question about Shelterwood, but Anna says, I just read Before and After. Oh, the connections between these people. I felt it in my soul. How did meeting those real people and hearing their stories as they came together affected you?
Oh my goodness. So when Before We Were Yours came out, I had, during the research phase, talked to a couple real life adoptees from the Tennessee Children's Home Society. And they had been baby adoptees adopted into high profile Memphis families. And so they would talk to me on the proviso that I didn't ever use their names, or, that I didn't out them. And they were babies when they were adopted, so they didn't remember it or anything. It never occurred to me that I would start hearing from the real life adoptees and the next generation people. But I was only a few weeks into the tour before they started showing up at the book tour. And sometimes they would have these notebooks full of either their search for their family or when they found their birth families. And then by the time I got home, they were contacting me on email and sending me their, copies of their documents and things to tell me their stories. And they kept asking, would you ever get us all, would you ever do a reunion? Like, would you ever get us all together? Because there's no clearinghouse for these people. There's no Facebook page. There's no place. And then I was going to that went on for a couple of years, and there were a few of them who would write to me pretty frequently, 4 women. And then I was going to go speak in Memphis, and I put it off for a little while because I was scared to do it, because I was afraid, what if I do it and it's not a good experience for them? What if nobody shows up? What if creepy people show up? And you can what if yourself to death.
Mm-hmm.
But I was asked to go speak in Memphis at the glass chapel that's in the graveyard where the official Tennessee Children's Home Society burial plot is. 19 of the estimated 500 or 600 kids who didn't survive their time with the society are buried in this official plot. And I just thought, if you're ever going to do it, this is the place. You're back in Memphis doing a speech at the glass chapel in the graveyard. And so I just asked these 4 women, I was do you want to help guide getting together a reunion? And they became what we called the Core 4. And the Core 4 made plans, and we all got a hotel where we could all stay. And they came. I didn't know. I just put the word out to all the ones I had heard from, and people flew across the country. They came on fairly short notice and brought their books and their pictures and all their things from their searches. And some of them were going to meet birth family members for the first time while they were there. And it was just the most amazing thing. And our first event was, I was speaking on a Friday we added a couple more speaking events because they kind of kept filling up, because it's a Memphis story. And by then the book was really well known. And so the first one was at a retirement home on a Friday in a big ballroom, and kind of between lunch and ice cream social hour at the retirement home. And so anyway, my co-partner who helped me write that book, my writer friend, Judy Christie, we're sitting on stage and we're looking at this big audience of people. And Judy leans over and she says, well, we messed up. We should have had some way to meet our people ahead of time and give them name tags. She's like, we can't tell who's here for the reunion and who just lives at the retirement home. But when it got to the Q&A part, they started raising their hands and saying, I was an adoptee. My dad was an adoptee. I'm here with my dad who was an adoptee. And so then we broke for punch and cookies because it was the retirement home. That was important. And the coordinator said, would the people who are here want to come up and be a panel? And I just thought, I haven't even met these people. I don't know how they feel about this. But they got up out of their chairs and down they came. And, it was like, for a lot of them, the first time they'd been able to publicly own their stories, because it was a scandalous thing. They'd been kind of told not to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And, they came and they owned their stories. And it was just, the whole weekend was absolutely beautiful.
Wow. The things you get to do. Like
you never know where a book will lead. You never know. You
never knew that was, you wrote the book, but you didn't know where it was going to go from there. Something that Chad is saying, you helped her family connect with a lot of members of the family as a result of that book and the writing. Her mother was one of the chapters, I think she said. I'm reading quickly in the chat. But it's just those moments that you don't know what the book is, you don't know what books do, and you don't know what books bring to people's lives.
Yeah, no, you never ever know. And I have met, like Peggy, the most wonderful people through that book and then doing before and after. And then, every about once a month, I'll hear from somebody new who is searching for their history or just wants to tell me their, history with the Tennessee Children's Home Society. So one of the adoptees has helped a number of other people, well, like 85 files she's got, who are people who came forward and were like, said, do you know anyone who can help us? And she has solved a lot of the cases. And so people in their 80s and 90s have gotten to see pictures of birth parents for the first time or lay flowers on a, birth parent's grave or that kind of, it's just been that book has had this whole life that, I never imagined it will have. I've seen that in smaller versions with other books. Sometimes someone will write to you and something in the book was really relevant to their life in a way you never imagined it would be, or in a circumstance you never imagined it would be, or they'll say this was the last book I read to my mother as she was dying in the hospital or what. So I mean, I've seen it, but never in this capacity, never a bunch of people who are all intertwined in this way, who were brought together by the book. It's had its own life.
Wow. Around the world. That's the crazy thing too. It's not just here, it's around the world.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Shelterwood. I just got Shelterwood in Hungarian. And it's just amazing to me. I was telling the people last night, I was showing them Shelterwood in Hungarian, and I said, if you sit down and read it, and, the brain science proves that when we read, our brain's lighting up as if we were doing the real things that we're reading about, which may mean we need to be careful what we read about. But anyway, I said, you now have a common experience with someone who sat down in Hungary, halfway around the world, and read this book in another language. Like, that person is reading about southeastern Oklahoma, where you live. Isn't that amazing? They now know about the Winding Stair Mountains and the names of the towns around here. And, they're reading words of the Choctaw language in Hungary. I mean, that to me, that's just magic. And what else does that except books?
Yeah, and everybody always says, "Oh, is there a movie deal?" And it's like, no, wait, it's the book. It's being able to put all that stories together. You couldn't put together all the people that were happening in that nursing home. You couldn't do that kind of a thing because it's those surreptitious kind of moments where you just find each other. You start talking to each other.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't believe the ways the book fell into some of the people's hands who then came and contacted me. And one guy was sitting in a restaurant and heard the people in the next table talking about Before We Were Yours. And he said to them, "Oh, my mom was adopted from the Tennessee Children's Home Society." And they gave him the book. They were like, "You need to read this." I mean, just the weirdest ways that book fell into the hands of some of the people who then, realized that was a connection in their family, who then reached out. And, now I have this amazing family of Tennessee Children's Home Society families and adoptees. And, we're watching their kids and grandkids grow up. And I see them when the Shelterwood tour, I met up with, I think 3 in different places, who are friends. And so we get to catch up when I book travel. And it's just been the best. I mean, the best thing about books, and the reason I think they matter so much in this wilderness of Facebook, Twitter, all these things, which I realize we're on Zoom when I'm saying this, but you get me. It's the connections they build between us. If we read together, we become people who have common experiences. We have something in common in what we've lived through in the book and the understanding of things we've gained from the book. So we're joined, we're a community of people, and we need that. We've lost that in these generations. When I was a kid, if you went to town, like, you knew all those people, you knew their stories, you knew if they'd been on vacation, you knew all the stuff, and we don't anymore. And the thing is, books bring us together in that way. Books make a community of us. And we need that. The books are one of the few places we're still doing that. And we need to fight hard for our book places, our bookstores, our libraries, our book clubs. We need to make the time for those things because we need people we can look in the eye and we have a common understanding of things.
And I feel like a lot of the other that we're talking about social media is these blasts. It's like the other day I can't take one more thing coming at me, one more person acting, holding the book, or not even holding books, holding product, whatever, driving me completely insane. And what we really love about doing these events, one of the reasons I'm so glad you're here tonight, is to put people together, to be able to hear you and to be able to communicate with each other in their conversations while this is going on. And people all over the country getting to talk about a book all together. We have hundreds of people here tonight, folks, and to be able to be doing that all at the same time, it's really interesting for us. And we've been doing this, I guess now, well, since the pandemic started, so 5 years. And to see readers and hear the way they're all connecting with each other as well. It's there
Absolutely.
nothing like it. There really isn't, you know?
There's not. And I'm looking at, I mean, obviously, like I said, we're doing an online thing, but I'm looking at where everyone's from. And,
Yes.
we couldn't, this is the only way we could all come together
Hmm.
to talk about the book, because a lot of these places, the book tour didn't go there
Right.
and they're not close to each other, but we're all here and we all have this thing in common. Like we're part of the Shelterwood gang, because we've read the book, right? And that to me is just, like I said, what else does that? What else makes us feel like we have experience in common with someone who lives across the country in a completely different circumstance, in a different house, in a different body, but we've all been in the same body as we read the book,
Hmm.
because you are literally in the body of the characters. If they do the brain science, it shows that's where you are. You're in the body of those characters. So we've all been the same person in a way
And I also
as
feel
we
like
went through the
sometimes
story.
you miss something that's in a book too. You'll miss something, and then you're talking in conversation like, I didn't even see that. Wait, 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 wait. Let me go back and look because you're reading from what you're seeing, but you're sharing things now that are making people like, wait a second. When I discuss this with my group, when I go in and have this conversation, I'm going to know this, or I can go back and reread the book and see it differently because it's a different informed. And a book is one of the few places that's just a singular experience. It's just you with the book. And when I finish reading a book, sometimes I'm reading it early. There's nobody to talk about the book with, nobody to have a conversation with. And it's like, oh, I really like to talk about this right now, but there's nobody to talk about it with. And you wait for the moment. And sometimes you have to wait till the paperback that enough people have read the book that you can actually have a conversation like this because everybody else is coming and reading it for the first time. But they're coming to the book then and they're coming to get the book. And then when the paperback comes out, oh, I might have read it, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When the paperback comes out, there's a lot more people who already kind of have it under their belt, and you have to worry a lot less about things you can't say because they're spoilers
Right, right.
and whatnot. And so yeah, and you're talking about kind of the lens we all read through. And that's part of the interesting part of book sharing and book talking and doing things like this, because we all read a different book. I mean, a
Hmm.
book is just like the words in the book are like a little melody. My kids played in band and we'd go to their orchestra concerts twice a year. And, it's just a little melody. It's like the flute. And then it gets in the reader's brain and the conductor's in there. It's like the band conductor, and he's bringing in all these things from that person's life. If I talk about grandma's house, that's different. For some people, that may be an apartment in the city.
Hmm.
For some people, that's a farm and you can smell the farm smells. And, for some people, there's homemade pie on the windowsill. And for some people, grandma didn't cook, but, she was a wonderful card player or whatever. I mean, that's different for us. So people, you enrich it with your own experiences. So no two people read the same book.
Hmm.
That's why it's so fascinating to talk about books with other people.
Hmm. What did you take out of it? What did you take away from it? Wait, I didn't. Whoa. Who was your favorite character? Why? You know?
And that is the best
Absolutely.
part about these virtual events is able to gather everybody from all over the country and sometimes the world and be able to convene and talk about the book, all aspects of the book and things that you might not have noticed at first that you
Mhm.
now know just from talking to other people that you might not have talked to if you weren't at an event like this. So it really is fascinating every time we do this to see all these unique things that come about because of this.
Mhm. And we love getting to know
Absolutely.
the readers too. If we get to know
Hmm.
people, they'll write back and they'll say, oh,
Yeah.
this about that. And I'm behind on answering reader mail right now, but I really try to answer all the reader mail. If I don't answer it, I try to answer it in the newsletter because last week I totally forgot to put the reader mail in the newsletter. Totally forgot. So, Tom, is another question?
Yes, we have a question from Carla. She says, if covers are important, what about the blurbs? Do you have an opinion on whether they make a difference? I check them to see if authors I respect have blurbed them.
I pay attention to the blurbs for sure, because same thing, authors I love and I love their work. If they've loved a book, then I feel like I will probably love it too, or there will be things I love about it, and it makes me curious. It helps. It makes me interested. So I like blurbs. I know there's some talk these days about whether they'll continue doing that. I like it. I like to see what points in a concise few sentences someone else took from it as they read the book, and so.
How about
I
people
respect blurbs.
the flip side, people coming to you for blurbs? Does it probably happens a lot.
Oh yeah.
And then you're writing your book. Do you have time to, things like that too, because it goes both ways.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I do as much of it as I can. If I'm in a busy period, I just warn people when I'm asked. I I may get a chance to read it. I may like, don't let me take the place of somebody who's a sure thing because I'm on a deadline or whatever. And so if I'm stuck waiting on a flight or something, I'll have it with me. I always keep hard copy and PDF so that I can have it on my PDF reader on my phone. And, so sometimes you can have unpredictable time that you really can read. And, gosh, there's some amazing history in the comments. Sorry, I'm trying not to be distracted.
We'll get you the comments, so I'll
stories,
send you the chat.
yeah, I mean, yeah, like Glenda's sharing her family story there in the in the comment. I mean, there are so many amazing stories out there. People ask me if I'll run out of stories. I'll run out of life before I run out of stories that I think should be told. There are just so many amazing stories out there. And I guess the one thing I would communicate to people about that is the most often expressed, Glenda's comment is reminding me of this. The most often expressed regret to me when I'm out speaking by people who are there is I wish I had gotten my mother's stories, my grandmother's stories, my mother-in-law's stories, my father-in-law's stories down. We thought there was time, we didn't do it. Now we kind of remember pieces of it, et cetera. And get your old people and just turn on the recorder on the cell phone or the video or whatever and just get the stories down. You'll be so glad you did because they get lost in families.
There's this little deck called Tales that we did with my dad. My dad's 95. And for his 95th birthday, me, my children, the grandchildren, we all just sat around and asked him questions about his life. And you just pull a question out and we filmed it. And I said, we're going to want this because you don't know if 96, you'd still be getting the answers. You really don't know. And it's very interesting because you realize that is a huge part of your family history and what you do know and what you don't.
Yes, definitely. I mean, those things just get lost from families. And especially now because we used to sit at the knee of the grandparents because they're just before cable TV and everything. I mean, there was nothing on you wanted to watch anyway. So, there was a lot of just slow time when we would sit and listen to the old folks tell stories, but life is not like that anymore.
And then you also had to parse through of what was true and what was coming through.
Yeah,
would have been kind of whitewashed also,
A little bit of all of that, for sure. And, if you have good storytellers in your family, like in the Wingate family, they never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So you have to take it all with a grain of salt, but they can hold you just completely wrapped at the dinner table with the stories they tell.
We have a question from Tony. Do you think there's any chance of resolution or restitution for any of the victims of the Oklahoma land grab at this point, or is it too late?
Well, I'll preface by saying that Kate Barnard, before she got kind of steamrolled by the money men, bought all the newspapers in the state and began to slander her and things. And But she did win back thousands of acres, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres, and money for the rightful landowners. So there are families out there today who have their land because she got it back for them, and got restitution. Whether there will be any more of that today, I doubt it. I just think I not that it shouldn't happen. I just don't think it ever will. I think enough time has gone by and enough land records have become convoluted that, I just don't think it will happen, especially among these lands that were sold. I just don't know that the proof out there exists of where the money went anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple more questions. Celeste wants to know, who are your literary heroes?
Oh, goodness, my literary heroes. I'm a huge fan of, Zora Neale Hurston, Pat Conroy. I love voices that just have this, you can feel the place and time. Probably my biggest personal literary hero, or who inspired me the most, was, I grew up when the teacher would read to us a book if we were good, a little piece of it every day. And, that was just like the best part of the day when the teacher, so we read things like James and the Giant Peach and Black Beauty. And so one of those was, when I was in the third grade, was Where the Red Fern Grows, Wilson Rawls. They were filming the movie near Tulsa at the time. And one of my classmates was the little redheaded sister in the movie, Billy's little sister. And so Wilson Rawls came to speak to our class and our classes, our third grade classes. And, I just remember being in our little media center, little pit floor, that was a few steps down in the center of the school, all sitting crisscross applesauce for this guy to come talk. And, he just walked out there and he was like just this dude in a flannel shirt. And it was the first time I ever knew or really realized that authors aren't just dead people. Like real people write books and write these stories I could love. And so that was probably for me the biggest inspiration, just because I thought people can do this. My first grade teacher told me I would be a writer, but I didn't know until I saw Wilson Rawls that writers are kind of ordinary looking live people in regular clothes, and so it was such an inspiration to me, because I had loved that book so much.
Did you ever get a book to your first grade teacher? Have you ever able to track her down?
So I tried with the first book, Tending Roses, the school that I had gone to, because we were only there for a few months and then we moved away. And she wrote on my report card, keep that pencil going with that wonderful imagination, Lisa. I will see your name in a magazine one day. So I still had the report card. So I knew her name. That was back in, the paper report card days.
Yeah.
And, but I contacted the school. My first book came out. They wouldn't, give me any information. Third book came out. It was dedicated to teachers and to her. And a reporter in Northborough, Massachusetts did an article about how the late Mrs. Crackhart had inspired me and what happened in the first grade. And the bookstore lady in town read it, in Northborough, Massachusetts, read it. And she contacted Mrs. Crackhart, who was a regular customer of hers and was not late at the time, and had just taught the bookstore lady's daughter a few years earlier. So I had her early in her career, her teaching career. The bookstore lady's daughter had her, late in her teaching career. And so the bookstore lady brought us all together. The reporter did another article recanting Mrs. Crackhart's lateness. And for years and years, with every book, Mrs. Crackhart would read it and send me a note. The last books I sent her were before and after in the Book of Lost Friends during the pandemic. And I have the sweetest picture of her, 98 years old, on the patio of the nursing home, holding those books, still a reader. So it became just the sweetest, most wonderful relationship. And I got to thank her she said she remembered me. I mean, I think first grade teachers have to say that. But she was wonderful.
That is so sweet.
That's great. That is a really great story.
I think we'll wrap it up with this. This might or might not be an easy question for you to answer, but Lori asks, out of all the books you've written, do you have a personal favorite?
Oh, that's so hard. It's like,
I
what's your
figured it
favorite
might be.
child? It depends on how they're
Right.
acting. But, but yes, my sentimental favorite will always be Tending Roses because the stories in the book are my grandmother's real stories. My family will have you know we are not as neurotic in the people as the people in the book. It's fiction, but the grandmother and the stories that grandmother tells are my grandmother's real stories. And those stories came to me at a time. My grandmother was very private about her childhood because she grew up very poor and they were kind of the white trash in town. And when she married up to a self-sustaining farmer who was also 30 years older than her. So there was talk. But anyway, so she didn't tell us about how she grew up in this home that was poor and there was mental illness and, things went on. And I didn't learn about it till she came to stay with me and my first baby. And she just told me those things. And she talked about how driven she was as a young woman to prove her worth, having married this man, who was above her station, so to speak. And how fast the time went by. And she would say things to me like, "Oh, Lisa, you have all your life to work. This baby's going to grow up before you know it." And it just, that was 1990. Everybody was get back to work and, have all the stuff everybody else has. And it just gave me a different perspective. She was a different voice in that time for me. And so it will always be my sentimental favorite because it was about the emotional journey we took together and what her advice meant to me. My favorite book experience will always be Before We Were Yours, because it was the one that just went crazy in the world. And then it brought together, had this full life with the real life adoptees. So, so it's kind of a twofer.
Yeah, that's glad. Well, I have the next question is what's next for you? Are you working on something?
Yeah, so I am just in the idea drawer. I have all these things in the idea drawer, all these nuggets. I keep them there, and every once in a while, sometimes, like I had pack horse librarians in my idea drawer 15 years ago. I'll never write about it now because it surfaced. Somebody else wrote about it. It's done. It's gone. So I'm just in the process of pulling out the thing I think I want to write about next. But what has to happen now is to really dig into the research and make sure there's enough of what you need there. And sometimes I'll dig into a story and the reality is just too tragic. It doesn't make a good, it doesn't make a good book. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now, digging through, finding the research. It's a little more recent time frame, like 1950, which would be a fun time period to write about. So we'll see. We'll see if it happens.
It's still history.
It's still history. Yes, exactly.
Though I don't like to think about that, but it's still history. It's really funny when you sit there and say, like, so we're writing about like 1978 is history. And I'm like, no, not really. Please don't do this. Don't do this.
I asked a bunch of kids one time, if you could go back to a time period in history, what time would it be? We're going around the circle. I used to always say, let's go around the circle, everybody answer, because the shy ones, won't answer otherwise. Right. So we're going around the circle and they're like, the Old West, the Roman times. And one of them says, the 70s. I'm like, wait a minute. That is not a time in history.
And then you think about the 70s are how long ago? You sit there and say,
I know.
And there's certain like pop music references from the 90s that I missed because my music reference was a little bit earlier. And even there's some star passed away today. And I was like, those shows were not shows I watched. It's just really interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah, it is. Everybody's frame of reference is different. But it's bad when times you remember become historical time periods.
Yeah, this is historical. Yeah. Kristen Hanna jokes about that. She's, wait a second, wait, my life is historical? Like, I didn't think that. I wasn't going there when I sat there thinking about this, So
I know.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's always so much fun. And tonight was even more fun because we brought you to a larger group of our readers, which was just so special.
This was so much fun. Thank you for hosting. It's the perfect way to wrap up the release of the paperback and, just being able to have everybody in here that we haven't been able to get out there and see live, and then other friends who, I've met and know. And so I'm just, thanks to everybody who came. This was so much fun. And thanks to you for hosting and bringing us all together.
And to our voice of God, Tom Donadio, you did a fabulous job of plucking out the right questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to all the readers who asked the questions so that I was able to read those great questions. And thank you, Lisa, for joining us. This was such a great evening.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks, Tom, and to Debbie also. This was just great. And to everybody who left I can't wait to go through and really read all these comments. I'm trying to stay focused, but it's like there's gold over here in the comments window too.
Oh, it was such a lively chat tonight. I was monitoring it. You'll love reading through everything.
I can't wait to read everybody's comments.
The chat was great. And sometimes it's the author that brings out the best in the readers in the chat at the same time, where they start really talking away. And you definitely have that gift that you were like part of their conversation, even down there. You can just tell. You can tell. They like being in the room. They were at the table,
I'm so glad.
So, oh my gosh. Well, you can get on and have a lovely evening, or you could stay for the rest of my announcements tonight, whichever you'd like to do. And I'll be in touch with you soon. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. We'll get together again soon for coffee.
Yes, we definitely will. I'll be back. I'll figure a way to get back out to the Rockies. That was just really funny. My husband had a meeting, so Lisa and I got together, and it was just really funny. I'm going to be in this town. Is that near the town you're in? Yes. And then we went to a town that neither one of us knew, which made it even funnier. It was like
absolutely. It was great though.
It was really fun. You know what though? Those are the best experiences. It's just like, oh, we're just going to go do this, and it'll be fun. And then we started talking about the paperback, and we started talking about this idea. So it's just those are the kind of moments I absolutely love. It's nothing like we've planned in advance what we're going to talk about. No, we do the same thing.
Nope.
Well, I've got a couple more announcements for people. Tonight's event will be available on YouTube and on our podcast soon. And everybody who signed up, you will get that link, and we will alert you when that is live. We've created a new events page for those of you joining us for the first time on tbrnetwork.com. There's an events, and you can sign up for all of our programs out there. Our next Bookaccino Live book group program will be on Wednesday, March 26th. What we really like about February and March in non-leap years is the dates stay the same, the day. So it's Wednesday, the 26th of March. Anna Quinlan is going to be joining us to talk about After Annie. And we have two events before that. And our March Bookaccino Live book preview afternoon event. And for people who don't know what that is we have an afternoon event at 2:00 in the afternoon for about an hour. I talk about books coming out in the next 4 weeks and then preview a month out from there. So that event will be taking place on the second Wednesday of the month, Wednesday, March 12th at 2:00 in the afternoon. It's TBR, the bookreportnetwork.com. So it's tbrnetwork.com. Somebody was asking me down in the chat. Also, we do a spring preview evening event with the books that are coming out this spring that we think you'd want to have on your radar. And we do this in the evening, and that will be on March 19th at 8:00 at night. And that a sign up for that is also about on the TBR Network page. If you sign up for our events at Book Report Network newsletter, you'll never miss an event. We send that out like once a month. We also have a number of other newsletters. We have a weekly one where we handle book reviews. And on Tuesdays, we have a newsletter that goes out called On Sale This Week that talks about books on sale this week in hardcover and paperback, and the week coming up, the week after that. So we also have, and I know some of you are new and some of you have been with us for a really long time. We have more than 210 Book Reporter Talks to Author events that I have done in the past, including another interview that I have done with Lisa, where we covered some different territory. And those are available on our YouTube channel or the bookreportnetwork.com. If you go to tbrnetwork.com, we've got videos and podcasts there. So all the ones that I've done are out there as well. And the last interview that I did with Lisa One of the reasons we were so anxious to do this event, it had 1,200 views the last time I checked. So people are going out. If you have a book club and you want to be able to do have a discussion and your group couldn't join you tonight, at least we feel like these are resources that you can bring to your group and say, look, we might not be able to get Lisa for conversation, but here's something you can watch and enhance our conversation and enhance our discussion. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. It was a very, very special evening. I know Lisa enjoyed it. We did as well. And thank you and good night.